to go?
Yes, ready to go.
All right, so call to order this meeting, mixed use land use meeting to order for May 31st. It's 4:03 p.m.
Great, thank you. And I see Eric Wallace in the attendees, so I just promoted him to panelist. I'll just give him a minute to join us here.
There you are. Welcome, Eric. So
Okay,
we're all good.
Great.
Item number 2, new business 2.1, mixed use land use policies and standards, staff report by Cindy Yee, senior planner.
So we'll actually need to backtrack and read the teleconferencing provisions. I'm just going to quickly go.
Okay, I will give that to you then, Salama, first.
Assembly Bill 361 suspends certain provisions of the Brown Act, allowing public meetings like this one to be held by teleconference to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. I will now conduct roll call, after which I will ask the chair to recognize me in order to confirm certain matters for the record. Mayor Hudson?
Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Marks?
Here.
Commissioner Wallace?
I'm here.
Councilmember Zafar?
Here.
Thank you. I will now proceed with confirming matters for the record. Based on the responses to roll call, the record should reflect that all committee members can hear the proceedings clearly. If there are no objections, the record will further reflect that each committee member believes, based on voice or facial recognition or otherwise, that the persons representing themselves to be committee members are in fact committee members. So please, there's no objections. Seeing no objections, I will turn the meeting back over to Commissioner Zafar, or Council Member Zafar, with a reminder that all votes must be taken by roll call. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 2, new business 2.1, mixed use land use policies and standards, staff report by Cindy Yee.
Okay, great, thank you. I will go ahead and start with a screen share. Just waiting for that to come up here. Be able to see my presentation?
It's rolling in. There you go. Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to provide a brief overview of the staff report. This afternoon, we're convening our first general plan mixed use ad hoc committee meeting. Topic today is related to the mixed use land use policies and standards. So in the staff report, it provides you a pretty extensive overview of how mixed use came to be in San Ramon. Really in 1995 was where the city first established the mixed use land use designation. And then in 2001, when we adopted our general plan 2020, that voter approved document identified a guiding principle that created the concept of mixed use centers, which essentially are centers that take existing retail shopping areas and created opportunities for a mix of uses within those key locations. The definition of mixed use has changed since 2001, but generally the intent of that land use designation still is to integrate a mix of non-residential and residential uses. The current general plan 2035 has a definition that maintains this mix of residential and non-residential uses. It establishes a maximum FAR of 0.7 with additional FAR allowed when there's an affordable housing component to the project. And you're looking at densities of 14 to 30 dwelling units per acre with a horizontal or vertical configuration. And then oftentimes we've seen live work as one way to satisfy the commercial component of a mixed use project is through the creation of live work units. So in the current general plan, there are 5 policies related to mixed use. And they're in the land use element of the general plan. They are general in nature, and they ultimately point to the zoning ordinance to provide the more specific details about development standards. But this slide just is a summary of those 5 policies. The first one is, again, speaking to these mixed-use centers and promoting the redevelopment of these mixed-use centers, providing design standards for mixed-use development, incentives to increase FAR and density when there are affordable components to a project, and then encouraging the redevelopment of the marketplace, both on the east side and the west side of Marketplace, the street, and then requiring parking studies when there's a reduction for parking proposed. So as I mentioned, these policies are really general in nature. It's really designed to provide a certain degree of flexibility to encourage redevelopment of retail centers. A lot of the definitions, again, have not changed in the last 20 years. And so our goal now is, in response to changes that have been made to state law for streamlined development review, we're seeing that there's a potential impact to the city's retail footprint in some of these mixed-use centers. And so there's really a need to update these policies as part of the general plan update. And we're here as our first opportunity with this ad hoc committee to get some policy direction on the mixed-use land use. So in your staff report, there are 3 policy discussions that we'd like to tailor our conversation around this afternoon. The first question was regarding the 2 existing shopping centers that are currently a housing opportunity site as of today. We expect that in 2023, when we roll into our 6th cycle housing element, that those portions of those shopping centers will remain as a housing opportunity site, but we're going to be reducing the size of that housing opportunity site. And so there's an opportunity for the city to consider a new land use designation on the portion of the shopping center that would no longer be a housing opportunity site. One of the discussions that we've had about how to address retail is the ability to potentially redesignate some of those land uses to maintain the retail. And so if we were to apply a non-residential land use to the non-housing opportunity site portion of the shopping center, that could be one avenue of addressing this loss of retail acreage. So those 2 shopping centers I refer to as the Marketplace Center, both, as I mentioned, the west side of Marketplace here, and then the east side of Marketplace, the roadway. I've referred to that as the Marketplace Center. As you can see, the entire center itself is currently a housing opportunity site in our housing element. Similarly, Country Club Village at Alcoston Village Parkway. In our 6th cycle, we're proposing only a portion of that shopping center to remain as a housing opportunity site, whereas the current cycle has the entire shopping center identified as a housing opportunity site. So the first discussion question is, should the city consider an alternate land use designation, such as retail shopping, for the portions of the shopping center that would now go back to a non-housing opportunity site? For the Marketplace, both west and east, we would maintain about 15 acres of the mixed use as the mixed use land use designation. So the areas shown in blue here represents the nearly 15 and a half acres of mixed use, but 11.4 acres would remain and have the ability to be redesignated to something else. Country Club Village, 3.99 acres, so nearly 4 acres in this blue area, which would allow for 6.76 acres to potentially be redesignated to some other alternate land use destination. The second question, as you know, the city has identified housing opportunity sites in our housing element. A number of those housing opportunity sites are going to be designated as mixed use in our new land use map. And so the question is going to be, with these sites that have an existing retail designation where 20 dwelling units per acre are going to be expected as the standard, what sort of strategies would the committee recommend for staff to incorporate into these policies to be able to maintain a certain amount of non-retail uses? So some of those recommendations that staff has on strategies would be establishing a minimum floor area ratio for commercial uses with a higher maximum FAR for a mixed use development. And so maintaining a certain amount of commercial uses through a development standard, but also creating still the opportunity for redevelopment by establishing a higher than 0.7 FAR than what we currently have. The second strategy would be establishing residential development standards in the mixed use zone, which would clarify the role of FAR and density for a site. Those development standards would specifically apply to residential, where you could establish some specific FAR and densities that are just related to if a shopping center were to redevelop with residential uses. And then the third question is tailored to one of our shopping centers that currently is a housing opportunity site in our 5th cycle. And the recommendation that we are carrying forward in our housing element in the 6th cycle is removing the Commons Shopping Center as off of a housing opportunity site, which would then give us the flexibility of identifying what land use alternative to the mixed use that's currently for that shopping center. Because the North Camino Ramon specific plan identifies a mixed use designation for this center, we would have to proactively identify a alternative land use designation in order to prevent the site from potentially redeveloping without the ability to regulate the mixed use. And so one of the, and given that it's no longer a housing opportunity site, the city's not going to rely on this shopping center to meet our RENA obligations. And so that does give the city an opportunity to reconsider what appropriate land use would be for this site. So in this orange color, you'll see what I've identified as the north and east portion of the shopping center. That's approximately 13.5 acres of land that could potentially be redesignated from the existing mixed use to something similar to retail shopping that's currently in our general plan. There could still be a potential if based on our discussion, to retain 8.25 acres of the southwestern portion of the shopping center for mixed use. That does give some flexibility for redevelopment on some of the less accessible, less visible portions of the shopping center, and potentially give an opportunity for some redevelopment options there. There will be housing opportunity sites directly to the west and south of the shopping center. And so that may create an opportunity for a transition in the southwest portion of the shopping center, transition from this residential housing opportunity site to a mix of uses on the southern portion, and then retail potentially to then be designated for this orange area. So, with that, that wraps up my staff report this afternoon. We will continue to take feedback and refine these policies and standards. We do have an upcoming joint session with the Planning Commission and City Council to follow up on our housing element draft. That's scheduled for June 21st. We do expect to schedule another ad hoc meeting to discuss mixed use in June as well. And so perhaps opening up our calendars this afternoon and seeing what might be the next opportunity for us to meet towards the end of June. And then taking that feedback and putting some additional work into that draft general plan. And then at a future meeting, look at some of that direction and changes that we're proposing and get some additional feedback from the full Planning Commission and City Council. So with that, that wraps up my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I know we have members of the public in attendance today as well. And so I can take questions after.
Yeah, so maybe we'll ask some clarifying questions, go to public comment, and then come back and discuss. I see Mayor Hudson has his hand raised. Commissioner Wallace does as well. So let's start with you, Mayor.
Yes, Cindy, just as a matter of procedure, so I was talking to Lauren about this earlier, do we keep track every time we approve something like City Walk of what that does to our growth management element and the jobs housing balance? I mean, for example, City Walk gets built, if Summerhill gets built, and we tore down Bishop Ranch 6, are we now at 1.1, 1.8 to 1 jobs housing balance, or is this something that just pops up during the general plan update?
So there's two different parts to that answer. When we're looking at specifically each individual development application, each project is subject to our growth management policies. So we are obligated with every development application for residential to make findings of consistency for growth management. So every project will have to evaluate what the impacts to services and facilities are in the city. So we are doing that as part of our growth management review. But the jobs housing balance, it is a policy in our general plan. And it's a goal that the city has established to get closer to a 1.0 ratio of number of jobs to employed residents. We will be updating that number as part of the General Plan 2040 update. It's not something we typically track until we do these general plan updates, but that is one of the goals of the city, is to get closer to a 1.0 ratio. And the more housing units we add, the more employed residents we add to the city, which gets us closer to our goal of a 1.0 ratio.
I would also add that we, in some cases, are losing office space and jobs as well, in the case of tearing down existing office buildings. However, the goal of many of the master plans, like the City Walk master plan, is to layer housing on top of what's there. But there is a dynamic that we have to acknowledge as well when jobs change.
Commissioner Wallace, you have a question?
I have several. First question, just so we're clear, if we reclassify areas in the Marketplace Country Club and also Crow Canyon Commons from mixed use to whatever we want, commercial parks or whatever, that doesn't affect our housing element, because we're only relying on the housing inventory sites to get HCD to bless our housing element, correct?
Right. So in the draft housing element, Appendix 11-D, that appendix identifies the housing opportunity sites that the city is using towards meeting our RENA obligation. And so that list of sites is what we're relying on to demonstrate to the state that we've met our RENA obligation. So these potential redesignations have the flexibility because they are not identified as housing opportunity sites for our 6th cycle.
Sort of a freebie for the housing element. Next question. Throughout our discussions and throughout the draft housing element, the word retail appears. And part of our discussion today is to preserve retail in San Ramon. I was not able to find a definition of retail either in our general plan or in our zoning ordinance, or actually any place else. Do we have such a definition?
We have a definition of retail shopping as far as the land use.
Yes.
The dictionary definition of retail, I don't believe it's actually in the definition of the zoning ordinance or the general plan. To my knowledge, there probably is not a definition we use for retail that's in the glossary.
Okay. Would you agree with me that since we are in large part trying to protect, quote, retail, close quote, in San Ramon, that it would be a good idea to define the term retails, in particular because the shopping center definition includes various items that, although they're sales, I don't think that we would consider them retail, such as services, financial services, and the like. So do we have a definition of retail so that developers know what is or what is not permitted in that category?
While we may not have a definition of retail, I oftentimes refer back to our zoning ordinance, division D2, I believe, or maybe D3, actually looks at, there are tables in there, land use tables, that identify what retail uses are. That's what the city has been using to identify the 25% non-retail versus 75% retail split are the land uses that fall into a retail versus non-retail category. We have identified what businesses are considered retail. And so that is currently in the zoning ordinance that identifies, is a restaurant considered retail or service? And so while it's not defined, we have been relying on the land use tables to determine which businesses are retail.
Okay, that seems like a cumbersome way to do it, but well, maybe we can improve on that in the next couple of months. Next question, and I'm probably going to step on someone's toes by asking this, but there is supposed to be a retail analysis that is being prepared by our consultant. And when can we expect to see that?
So I have received a draft from our consultant that is in the works. We are making some revisions to that screen check draft and reviewing that right now. We're expecting within the next couple of weeks, I would say, that a draft is going to be available for publication. Our goal is, with our EDAC meeting that is planned for June 22nd, that the retail analysis will be ready in advance of that meeting. And so between now and June 22nd, that retail analysis will be finalized and ready for publication.
My suggestion would be that prior to our next joint meeting between the Planning Commission and City Council, that report, even if it's in beta draft form, ought to be circulated to the Planning Commission and the City Council for their meeting. If there's a final version that goes to EDAC, so be it. But I think it'd be helpful for us to have that prior to our next joint meeting, as well as our next ad hoc meeting. Last question. We are proposing a minimum density for mixed use residential of 20 dwelling units per acre. It's now 14, but I believe City Center has 22. And I believe that the Village Center mixed use in the San Ramon Village Plan has a minimum density of 30 dwelling units per acre. So why are we looking at 20 for the general mixed use category when it takes up so much of the space in San Ramon that's possibly available for housing? Why not make it 25?
Well, certainly that's up to the purview of the density, target densities for mixed use. That is something that we've been discussing with our consultants on. Within these ranges that are set, is there ability for the city to set target ranges, target density? Okay.
Good.
So as I was saying, HCD requires that any site that is going to be used as a lower income housing opportunity site have at least the 30 dwelling units per acre. We set a range that was between that 30 for 20 to 40 to be able to provide that flexibility of having for the property owner to redevelop that site. We do also, as one of our suggestions, in addition to having the density range of 20 to 40, one of the strategies is identifying a minimum floor area ratio for commercial, as well as a program that would incentivize having a target density. So with all of those policies in place, 20 to 40 gives an option for some flexibility, but if there is suggestions that it should go to a higher minimum density, we'd want to have that conversation through this meeting today.
Well, the reason I brought it up is that the projects we've seen at the Planning Commission, either on a application basis or a concept review, they tend to be at the 2022 range. And the problem is that the type of housing product we're looking at is townhomes or things like that, for sale units. Usually the minimum size is 1,800 square feet. We're not getting anything that's our apartments or anything that's really affordable, and certainly nothing that was really contemplated in the North Camino Ramon specific plan. So that's why I brought it up, whether to raise the minimum for mixed use would help us really get the type of housing product we need in the city. I realize that in other areas in North Camino Ramon, we have high density housing and medium high density housing going from 40 to 60 units per acre. But we haven't seen any of those types of projects outside of the San Ramon apartment complex, which is still yet to be built. So I just wanted to raise that idea as a point of discussion. But since these are clarifying questions, that is the last question I had.
Thank you. Commissioner Marks, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's interesting. I think Eric and I have worked together long enough that we are seeing documents in very many ways the same way. I went back to the scope of work that was prepared for the contract when the consultant team was hired to do the work for the city, and reread parts of it that deal with the retail concerns in the land use element. And I just want to reference task 3.3 in part says there will be an inventory and document conditions in existing shopping centers and districts. Another point says There will be a market analysis that identifies major existing and planned districts that will compete with San Ramon for future demand. And then importantly, the document, the market analysis, will express bottom line findings in terms of the square feet of retail space that could potentially be absorbed in San Ramon over the planning horizon, with the total numbers broken down as appropriate by major retail category, emphasis retail category, and facility type. Again, the consultant is charged with doing a market demand study that will identify retail and restaurant uses that would be appropriate. My point is that, and I'm going back to a comment that Commissioner Wallace made, in the general plan, in the glossary, commercial is defined as a land use classification that permits facilities for the buying and selling of commodities and services. Commodities and services. If you do not distinguish between retail, particularly sales tax generating retail, and services, you come into the situation where imagine that you have, just for purposes of quick analysis, let's say you designated 40% of a shopping center today can remain as retail, and the other 60% is going to be allowed to convert to housing over time. You now have only 40% of what was there that is going to generate sales tax for the city. And we all know the importance of sales tax to the city's budget. But other uses that can come in include medical dental offices, veterinary services, pet grooming, childcare, daycare services, tutoring, financial services, real estate offices, tax planning offices, dental offices. My point is, of that 40% that remained, a good portion, if we do not distinguish between retail and commercial and define even there how much can be commercial and how much must be retail, your base, your retail base, your shopping base for residents in the city diminishes quite substantially. We had that problem maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, and that is why we as a city, the commission and the council, made the determination that no more than 25% of a shopping center could be non-retail, traditional retail types of services. And so my question here is, number one, I really think that before we make a decision, especially in answer to question number 2 that the staff has posed regarding the type of services that are going to be allowed in a shopping center, we need to see the consultant's work. We shouldn't today make any kind of decision, or even at another follow-up meeting, if we haven't had a chance to read the consultant's work, and therefore, to reiterate Eric's point, when will we get it, and how will that dovetail into the decisions that we need to make to give staff the direction that they would like to get from us. When I began this whole effort as a member of the ad hoc committee in December, preserving retail in the city was really the driving concern that I had. I had no doubt that the staff and the consultants would find an adequate number of sites for the RENA numbers that we are obligated to provide, and I think they have generally done that. But one of the things that I'm asking the commission, or I should say the committee, to remember is that part of what makes up, we're a city of neighborhoods, like most cities are. There's Twin Creeks, there's Bollinger Hills, there's Inverness Park. There's lots of neighborhoods. Part of any neighborhood is parks, schools, proximate access to public facilities, and routine shopping. And the more we take out facilities that are retail, true retail, the more we are limiting how this general plan update is going to work for them. And so I'm asking the staff, when you come up with a formula, if you come up with a specific formula, please bear that in mind. We have an obligation to the 90,000 people who already live here and the 24,000 people plus or minus that we have already approved housing for, that they don't have to leave the area. And the concern and the question I have is, will the consultant talk about sales tax leakage? In the last retail study that we did, one of the concerns that the consultant pointed out to the city council and the planning commission was San Ramon suffered from sales tax leakage. People had to go elsewhere to get what they want. By shrinking the neighborhood shopping centers, we are increasing the sales tax leakage. And one last point on that, that in every city that I've worked in.
So Commissioner
well, no.
Marks, do you want to save some of these for comments later? Because we
Okay,
wanted
well,
clarifying
again, the
questions.
question then is, could we please ask the consultant to take a look at what the sales tax leakage would be based on whatever formula that we're going to come up with, so that we understand the financial impacts of our decision. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Cindy. I know one clarifying question I had, we'd asked about providing data, but maybe we can come back to the comments part on that. With that, Samana, thank you, you're back. Are there any public comments?
We received one late communication item from Robert Klinger.
Yeah,
Robert Klinger,
saw that.
which is provided to the committee. And then we do have one hand raised. So it's Jim Blickenstaff. I'll go ahead and allow him to speak.
2 minutes or 3?
Let's do 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll first.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, good. All right. Well, this staff presentation is based on their thoughts on and suggestions for a way to proceed. It's what I call a starting point. And it's a good thing it's a starting point, because I see a lot of issues here that come up with retail as a viable maintenance for the future of the city. It's at risk here, and most at risk. Viable retail for the future is most at risk at the marketplace right now, where staff has suggested no HOS for Crow Canyon Commons. They have 65% of the marketplace site as designated at their suggestion for housing opportunity sites. And then those 3 sites surround what will remain of a retail, which pretty much precludes a lot of your viability of retail and your options for retail. And it might even be a precursor to eventually putting more housing there, because it suddenly becomes blighted as related to retail. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done by the Planning Commission and the council to do what's in the best interest of, for example, marketplace, a well-established retail center that serves a neighborhood and is still a viable location. And you don't want to corner it out of that opportunity by putting so much housing opportunity sites that it reduces the functionality of the retail. And there is good news beyond what the staff says at the webpage, because they say SB 330 eliminates subjective judgment as part of the review process. There is no discretion and requires projects to be, that requires projects based on opinion or whatever. That is not true. A legal ruling last year states, I should read it, this will only take a few seconds. Even with respect to standards that are not objective, HAA does not bar local agencies from imposing conditions of approval. Rather, it prohibits conditions of approval that the project be developed at a lower density, unless public health or service finds otherwise. Local governments are not barred from imposing conditions of approval that do not reduce density. So there's a great option there and discretion for how you want to proceed with keeping retail viable. The marketplace has 65% HOS sites cited around the marketplace. And I think it precludes future viability of that retail component, which has been historically important to the city of San Ramon and will be more so in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Susan Ferris Intercom.
Thank you very much. I want to pick up on some of what Jim was saying and also what Mr. Marks was saying about sales tax leakage. He mentioned neighborhoods, and right now Marketplace supports the highest housing density area in the city. We have multiple housing areas, including Inverness Park, Deer Creek, all of them. And there are high density units in there. There are single home units. And you're forcing those residents to drive further and further and further away to get to stuff. And it's even worse when you're having to hop to all these other little outer shopping areas to try and get your stuff done. So you're going to increase the leakage there. And then if you look at the map, the way you have Marketplace drawn now, you're blocking the shopping areas off from public visibility. That was one of Nob Hill's biggest comments, that they weren't visible where they were at. And if you're going to build housing along Bollinger Canyon and along the backside and the front side, nobody's going to see what's in there. And then if we don't get a master plan, as the general plan says there must be for the Marketplace, you have no idea what's going to be left in there as far as shops. And the current proposal from the developer, the only mixed use in there is going to be a Starbucks. There's no other mixed use proposed. And it's the same developer that owns the other area that you've now identified as a housing opportunity site. Without a master plan for that whole area, what's to preclude him from putting up another thing that says, oh, I'll put another Starbucks over there and housing over there? It really concerns me. And then you're taking Crow Canyon Commons and keeping that as a shopping center. It's one of the oldest shopping centers with almost no housing around it. And without a clear plan for what kind of shops are going to be in there, it just makes little or no sense to lose what really is supporting one of the largest housing areas in the city. So I'm just going to stress again, there are a couple caveats in the report here that allude to the fact that people may be thinking it's going to be too difficult to do a master plan for the Marketplace. But I'm adamant you have got to have a master plan for the Marketplace. And we need to see that sooner rather than later. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Gabrielle Comfolti.
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate what both Susan and Jim have said, and that I think that the fact that you have staff has separated out the Marketplace shopping center into 3 areas, 2 which are housing and 1 which is will be an unviable retail section, is just not acceptable to the community. It seems as if you have accepted that the TRC proposal for townhouses and the shopping center is a fait accompli. And it seems that that is being done without the master plan that is specifically being required by your general plan. And you have highlighted this as well in the GP 2035, section 46123, where you say that it's important to recognize that not all types of mixed-use development will work in all mixed-use designations absent a specific plan. And I know that the city seems to be reluctant to spend the time and effort to do a specific plan, but a master plan should be the absolute minimum that is required. There is there are difficulties because the shopping centers are not owned by the same people. But it doesn't benefit anybody to have this developed piecemeal without an integration of traffic and other concerns. Susan pointed out that right now, because they lost the Nob Hill Shopping Center, which was in a difficult location, now everybody has to go into their vehicles to drive to a major supermarket. And Trader Joe's is not a major supermarket. It doesn't meet the requirements that the residents need. And hundreds of people used to walk to the Nob Hill Center, and now they have to go by car or order in and get deliveries by car. And that doesn't behoove the the general regulations that we were trying to avoid people getting into their cars to do neighborhood shopping. And allowing a piecemeal development of this site is going to guarantee that you will not have a successful site. The existing shopping center is being deliberately not taken care of. It's a disgrace. And if you don't do something about it, you will lose the entire shopping center eventually. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments?
That appears to be the last of the public comments.
All right, so we're closing public comments. Matters up for discussion now in front of the committee. Anybody want to kick it off? Mayor Hudson does.
See,
You
when
have
you
to go
stay
ahead.
muted, you can do anything. It's, I think everybody that you heard from today touched on something. It's how to tie the whole thing together. I almost wanted to jump in when Rick started down that path, but we were in questioning, and I think he's got a pretty good idea. But it's this word retail, and does it tie necessarily to the sales tax that I want to touch on, because sitting on some regional committees, I can see where things are changing. Their winds are a little bit different than they were back when we started doing things called mixed use. I gave Cindy, I gave Lauren a copy of a draft transit-oriented communities policy about MTC. And money is going to be driving a lot of things. You've heard the story of AB 2337. I get that right. They want to run everything through climate change. Well, right now, in the Bay Area, if not the entire state, they want to run everything through, including transportation, climate change, or equity. So I'm going to make sure that everybody, Rick, Eric, the whole planning commission gets a copy of this, as well as the council. But the first line in the goals is pretty empathetic to what we've been hearing from the attendees and from council and commissioners. MTC, Transit-Oriented Communities Policy, seeks to support the region's transit investments by creating communities around transit stations and along transit corridors that not only support transit ridership, but that are places where Bay Area residents of all incomes can live, work, and access services. I think that's a little bit what I was trying to jump into Rick. I said, that's what I think you're talking about, such as education, childcare, healthcare, and during the joint MTC Planning Committee with the ABAG Administration Committee, I added groceries. It's not just the shopping centers that people are going to. It is, you have a retail component that you may not go to every day, but for food and some of the services that are in these grocery stores, people will drive to them every day. Well, we've already approved 4,900 homes, might as well call it 5,000 with the Residence Inn, which already exists in one of these HOS spots. And they're not there yet. Now, granted, the grocery store is gone, but with 5,000 more homes, are we going to make each one of them drive 5 miles a day to get these services that we're talking about? And that's really going to be the question that's in front of Planning Commission when they look at this, when they do look at this thing. I'd also like with the same wording, and I won't go into it too far for you to take a look at page 15 when you get a copy of this, because they're talking about something we're going through, and it's small business and nonprofit overlay zone, commercial protection and stabilization policy that fulfill the TOC policy requirements. Establish boundaries designated for an overlay triggering a set of protections and benefits should development impact small businesses, including public markets. Now, I'll touch on three things quick and I'll get off my soapbox. Eric, spot on. In this policy, it talks about if you're a tier 4, which we will be with Valley Link, we already are for the most part with the San Ramon SAFE program that we run to BART. It talks about 25 to 35 homes. If you're going to be in the residential within walking distance. And frankly, do you want to blow off all the transportation money, especially when you're doing everything right? I mean, we've had the executive director of ABAG saying City Walk is the model for the entire Bay Area. But I asked the question because I wanted to know what the growth management as we get towards the one-to-one jobs housing balance, all of this, all of the vehicle miles traveled studies, SB 375 direction, everything we've been talking about was for climate change. That's what SB 375 is about. And our only true #1 obligation is reduce vehicle miles traveled. Well, it's starting to go even higher than that. At the Air District, we've started something, we're not going to lose one more job. We were just adamant, put our foot down. Well, now I'm hearing it at ABAG, not one more vehicle mile traveled, which is kind of a big lie because River Island, Silicon Valley, over by where you used to work, Rick. But I think the real question is going to come, two of them, and you're going to have to answer it over the next couple of months, or at least before we get to the next ad hoc committee. Is the highest and best use what makes the owner the most money, or what's best for the community? And the Planning Commission has the ability to look into the future. You don't have 5,000 homes there now, but we've entitled them. To some extent, they're there. And what Rick was talking about, you become used to these markets. Now, I've gone through 3 or 4 or 5 over where I live, and the last one ends up being Walmart. Little Asia before that, Rayleigh's, Safeway was there when I first moved in. I mean, they change, but the location doesn't, and that's real estate. So I hope as we go forward, we realize that retail is not just what generates sales tax, it's what generates less vehicle miles traveled. And it is the equity and this climate change, which has the ears of all the regional committees of all your state and federal representatives from the Bay Area. And we can do it all. So please keep in mind, it's not just sales tax, but it's this less vehicle miles traveled, and everything we approved in Bishop Ranch has free transit. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Commissioner Mark Wallace, do you guys have any comments?
I do, but Eric has his hands up first, so I will defer to him.
The only reason my
There
hands
you
up
go.
quicker on the mouse than you, that's all. Okay. I had a couple of comments. The first is, notwithstanding the tables in the zoning ordinance, I would like staff to come up with a usable single paragraph definition of retail that an average developer can understand what it means. Of course, I will try and do that myself, and we'll see how that works out. The second is a little more technical, and that is, we have talked about in the staff report various numerical percentages for the difference between commercial / retail. I'm putting them in one bucket, and residential in another. I've seen mixed use statutes in other jurisdictions, and they run the gamut from 25% residential to 75% residential, and the flip side for commercial / retail. What I would like to know is what exactly in the context of San Ramon do those percentages mean? In other words, if we say, okay, for mixed use, we want 25% to be non-residential and 75% to be residential, what are we actually looking at in terms of a product? And if you want something specific to run your hypothetical by, look at the area on Crow Canyon Road across from Crow Canyon Commons. That's where the US Bank is, that's where the Charles Schwab is. And those are the two businesses that go back, two small businesses that back up to what is now the Costco gas station. And it ends with Magnolia Square and Ulta, which someone described on the TV the other day as Home Depot for women. I thought that was kind of interesting. But use that as your hypothetical developer, because there is a developer who owns most of those parcels. So if we say we want 25% commercial/retail and 75% can be residential, what type of product are we looking at? Let's suppose we go 50-50. What type of product are we looking at? You also talked about floor area ratios on the commercial side. What do those really boil down to in terms of real world consequences? If we say that we want an FAR of 0.85 for the non-residential portion of mixed use, what type of product are we looking at? Are we going to have developers tell us we can't do that, they don't pencil out? Or can they say, well, with that type of numbers, you get X or Y? I mean, to throw out these numbers without having a real concept of what that boils down to on the dirt level, I think is a mistake. So I would like to see some type of information on that basis. And if nothing else, give me a phone number of a developer and I'll talk to them about it. I have no shame about asking dumb questions of people to get an answer. So I would like to know something along those lines. So the next time we have a conversation on that point, someone can sit up and say, okay, on a 25%, 75% basis, here's the type of product you're probably going to wind up with. And taking example of those places on Crow, this is what you're going to see. And then we can ask ourselves, is that something we want to see? Is that in the best interest of San Ramon, given Crow Canyon Commons on the other side of the road? Then we can make some, qualitative decisions. But I think that plus the consultant's report is sort of the ground level basis for making rational decisions on this subject, because it isn't that simple or clear cut. Those are my comments.
Commissioner Marks.
Thank you. I would like to turn our attention to page 3 of the staff report, the policies at the bottom of the page, 4.6-1-25 and 4.6-1-26. I don't know if these are policies that the staff is also suggesting be included in the update, but I wanted to go through them because I had some questions and concerns about them. I want to start off and say policies are really the way of the city to talk to a developer about what we expect, not what we hope. They are supposed to be directive. They are supposed to be directive to the point where, with a certain amount of flexibility, that it is very clear to those who are proposing a project that they know how their project will be evaluated, and they can be assured that to the extent that they meet the policy direction of that is stated, that their project has a good chance of being approved. So the first point I'd like to make in 4.6-1-25 is in the second line of the policy. It's the fourth word in the word amenities. I think that is that the policy includes too limited a description of what those amenities might be. You have to understand that anyone developing a retail site into housing is not going to have a lot of room to build anything or dedicate anything of significant size or quality. Yes, they might commit an outdoor seating area, and that's fine and good, but I would like to explore the notion that the word amenities also include off-site amenities, not just on-site amenities, but off-site amenities. And that could be everything from, let's say that a portion of a city park needs an improvement that the city does not have the ability to fund right now. It is proximate to this particular location wherever the housing is proposed. But it's within a public park system or the public trail system or the creation of a public trailhead. And staff, I'm sure, can come up with better list than I just did. But my point is to require these amenities to be on site. There won't be that many. They won't be of much scale. So why not a mix of public and private amenity, or public amenities that are offsite and public amenities that are on-site? The second policy I want to talk about is, again, 4.6-1-26. And I want to do a little bit of wordsmithing here. Again, the policy is written in a very soft manner. And I appreciate what staff was doing when it wrote that, whenever it did. But again, when you start off with a so-called policy that encourages, that's not a policy. That's a wish. That's a hope. That's somebody, we'd like you to consider something. I don't believe that that's a strong policy when we're giving them potentially revenue generating long-term FAR value. It seems to me it's not a particularly fair trade-off to say we're going to encourage something. So I would like to see that be required, change to the word required. I would also like to say that on the third line down, there's a second sentence that begins, any such master plan should focus on facilitating, et cetera, et cetera. I think it should say shall focus. Again, be directive and not suggestive. And then I would go to the last line in that box. After the words master plan, I would take out the word would, insert the word shall, and the word would follows 2-3 words later. So the first would, W-O-O-D, would be shall, and the second one I would eliminate, and I would pluralize contains, so that the sentence reads, master plan shall be required that shall contain an analysis, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I understand the direction that staff is going, but it just seems to me that it opens the door when you say encourage or should. That is not as directive or likely to produce the results that I think the city would want. I'd also like to ask for not a question, but ask for some follow-up work. And I'm turning to staff report page 7. Under the heading discussion question number 2. Quite honestly, the opening sentence is some strategies staff would recommend considering include A, establishing a minimum FAR for commercial use, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure I really follow how that would work. I'm envisioning myself several years down the road if a policy is written similar to that, and the commission and the staff have to interpret how to do this. It would be helpful if for the next ad hoc committee meeting, the staff could produce some hypothetical worksheets that demonstrate how would this operate? How would this work in a shopping center? What are the steps that you go through? What happens at each step that ultimately leads to whatever the staff's recommendation and the commission's decision might be? It's not that I disagree with it, it's that I'm uncertain how to manipulate my way through it. And I'm hopeful that with one or two or more hypotheticals in a worksheet kind of format, we can be sure that we all understand how this would work and what are the results that would come out of it. I think at this time, those are my requests and comments. And so I will at this point yield and wait for other people to speak.
Thank you. So I think one of the things I'm hearing as well, and what I was thinking, just the word retail is throwing us off a little bit, where we would still want to, so it was mixed use, and now we're talking about retail, and perhaps we need to include retail, commercial, and services, but then that would bring us back to it being mixed use. So I guess, maybe defining and maybe making sure it's a combination of, Cindy, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I know that what wasn't included in the staff report is table 2-6, which is in the zoning ordinance. And I know that today we talked a lot about what would be retail, what would be non-retail, and that commercial can oftentimes include both retail and services. Table 2-6 has a listing of all of the retail trades that would be considered retail.
Yeah.
And it identifies what would be an allowed use in mixed use, what would be a use that would require a minor use permit or a major use permit. And then that same table identifies what would be considered a service or educational and residential. So that is how we evaluate the mix of a shopping center currently, because all of the shopping centers that have a mixed use designation also have a requirement to have at least 75% retail. And if they wanted to have more non-retail, that they would have to apply for that through a use permit. So it may not be clear in the staff report what specifically is retail, but we can certainly provide you with what we've been using as a definition for retail uses that are allowed in the mixed use. I think that would probably help, along with providing a paragraph of what retail is as was suggested today. But that will give you a better sense of how we currently maintain that retail, non-retail balance.
Yeah. And I'd put it as for me to go back and do my homework and read up on that as well. So thanks for pointing that out. I think it's important to have that pre-work in place for us to understand as we talk about it as well. And then my other comment was, I believe that's how we're all imagining this as we're talking about it as well, is we have a right balance of retail housing to create gathering spaces. And what I would love to see in, as we define the policies architecturally, I know you've covered some of that in your report as well. Architecturally, how do we create these as, spaces which are walkable, bikeable, and, include all those elements which create neighborhood gathering spaces. Because people, as we think about this, are going out for experiences right now. And we know, and we've talked about this, that online shopping has changed some of that as well. So what is that right balance in the square footage? And again, a lot of that is included, and thank you for including that in the staff report. I'd asked about, what, I don't want to make this decision based on gut either. I want to have data which says this is where it's going. So some of that, as was pointed out, looking at, what is that consultant report saying and recommending we do. What does some of the data around this suggest, how the cities are being planned, and what kind of retail is the future of retail, and not what we've historically seen as retail. So I would love to see if there's pre-reading we can do in terms of understanding that and make decision based on the consultant report and some of that data we might have. I see Commissioner Marks, you raised your hand.
I simply wanted to piggyback a little on what Cindy offered. If there is a definition placed in the glossary regarding retail as distinguished from commercial, the tables that Cindy referenced could be included in that definition, so that you don't have to necessarily redo everything, but state what the definition is and then refer people to those tables. And then they will have a more generic and then a more specific definition of what we are talking about.
And Mayor, I don't know if you had re-raised your hand or you were.
Yeah, even took it off of mute. I want to get to answering question number one, but on Commissioner Mark's last remark about commercial, I just asked that before decisions are made on this, again, pull up that TOC community policy that is forthcoming and the minimum required and allowed density for new commercial office development. There's a table. If we're tier 4, I've been kind of playing off of it because we are going to offer free transit within Bishop Ranch to people that live, well, we do live and work, they do live and work within the business park. And the required minimum density would be 1 for an FAR and allowable density up to 3. So it's how does it fit into that before we discard it? Because again, we're looking for people that we're trying to have on our side as we make decisions. I don't want to beat around the bush on question number 1. I think the housing site that you have for the western portion, I will just call it the sports basement and residence inn, leaving the daycare out of it. I might even leave the healthcare out of it for the reasons that I spoke to earlier. I can live with. I even could live with the part that is with the library. I just don't think it's going to be something developed anytime soon. As far as the housing site on the south end, I think there is absolutely no way you let that grocery site go, period. Now, I know back in 2001 or whenever we were doing this new world order of building housing on top of buildings, that it was fashionable. And, you know, if the law says we have to do it, fine. The law does not say we have to do away with what we are telling everybody at this meeting. What I've heard so far is a necessary service. So somehow, some way, I don't care if that HOS disappears and goes to the west. Again, I'll repeat it. The highest priority, highest and best use is not what makes the owner the most money. Location's the name of the game, and being closer to that transit and that overpass we're building, and the money we're spending makes that more valuable land. And I think that's where we should be focusing as far as the HOS sites, period. I know that's going to put you guys in a heck of a bind, but I can tell you right now, I see no way in the world after COVID and people lining up outside that grocery store that we don't have a good case. And I say that this is where we say the retail, commercial, whatever you want to call it, goes on that shopping center for that remaining portion. And that's my opinion on 1. I'll leave 2 and 3 alone for the rest of you, because I think you're right, Rick, till we get something back on 2, other than the commercial stuff I told you about. We're not going to make any decisions. But 1, I've made my decision.
So anybody else want to chime in on number 1? And how do you see that as, and the question being, the 2 existing shopping centers, Country Club Village and Marketplace, are currently in the 5th cycle as opportunity sites for HOS. And as proposed in the draft 6th cycle housing element, only a portion of each shopping center would remain HOS. And the GP land use designation of the entire shopping center is currently mixed use, and under state law, residential development would still be allowed in the non-HOS parcel due to its mixed use designation, even if the parcel is no longer in HOS. With that, with the reduction of the HOS, the city has the option to apply a different land use designation on the portion of the shopping center that is no longer in HOS. Applying a non-residential land use to the non-HOS portion of shopping center would address one of the concerns. Should city consider an alternate land use designation? as retail shopping for the non-HOS portion. Otherwise, it could be fully housing, Cindy, if we did not apply something like a retail.
Madam Chair, we should apply a different designation. I've said all along that I think the retail centers in the city should not be HOS sites. And so my goal is simply preserve as much of every site as possible as a shopping opportunity. And so to me, the answer to number one is yes.
If I could just add some additional comments on the discussion question. Keep in mind that the housing opportunity site, just because it's identified as a housing opportunity site, doesn't limit it from maintaining a certain amount of retail. And I think that's really kind of that second policy question that I've put in here, is that if it's going to be a housing opportunity site, what is the right way to preserve the retail that's already on there? Back in March, when we had our last joint session on housing opportunity sites, the list of housing opportunity sites that's currently in the draft element is what we're using for our RENA allocation. And so the opportunity sites that were shown in the blue in the staff report are sites that we've already been given, essentially majority direction from both bodies to move forward with those as opportunity sites. But we do have an opportunity now that we've removed some of these shopping centers and certain acreage off of these shopping centers, is that we have the ability to re-identify a new land use. And that's important because changes in state law have allowed any sites that have a current mixed use designation, regardless of taking off the housing opportunity site, still has the ability to redevelop because of the land use designation as mixed use. We would need to, as part of the land use update, redesignate those sites, and then to also demonstrate that there's no net loss in the change of that land use from mixed use to something else that's non-residential. So, and it has to be done concurrently. So we have to be able to identify essentially receiver sites, and where we're taking those sites off, we have to identify where those units could go. And we're using this opportunity because we've identified surplus in our housing element as those being the receiver sites for reducing the land use to a non-residential land use. So that's why we really want to make sure that we time this and have this conversation, and why we're trying to get some direction right now, because once we make that decision to take off the mixed use, then we have to go and figure out how many units we're going to be pulling off and whether or not we have enough sites to be a receiver site to not trigger the net loss issue. So although some of these questions are somewhat general, if we understand that from a practical standpoint, we want to preserve as much retail as possible, we want to try to look at, if that's the direction of this committee, to look at what that would then mean for retail by having that conversation. But we're trying not to revisit housing opportunity sites any longer, because we've kind of moved into now the retail preservation. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more to think about when we're trying to answer this first question.
I think Commissioner Wallace has a comment.
I have a comment. I have a question for Mayor Hudson. I was listening to his discussion about the south end of the marketplace, and I wanted to ask him, is it your inclination to take off both the HOS designation for that site and to change the land use designation to retail as opposed to mixed use so that the site cannot be developed for housing?
Yes,
Okay, I just want to make sure that my notes are correct. Okay. That
Just,
answered my
just
question.
to, just to clarify, are we talking about the southern portion that is designated blue, or are you talking about the remainder of the center to the south of the other housing opportunity site?
the housing opportunity site would go, as far as I'm concerned, to the sports basement area. I mean, the whole entire marketplace is mixed use. And the logical place to put it, in my opinion, is next to where we're offering free transit, which is just a walk away if hopefully the people are working in Bishop Ranch. The problem is that every time, and it's, Rick's saying it without saying it, every time we take away some retail, or forget the retail, the service that people shop for, whether you pay sales tax or not, they're going to drive to it. You can call it leakage or whatever. This is a prime site for taking away that leakage, and I don't want to lose it. Now, if you're talking about putting 40 more homes in the LOS on the HOS on the left, I'll live with it.
Cindy, could you, highlight what we're talking about?
Sorry, yeah, I just want to make sure that I understand. I refer to the picture on your left side as west Marketplace. So Marketplace runs through the center of these two properties. So west side, and then this is the east side here for Marketplace. So are we talking about this picture here where
Yes.
there's
Yeah,
currently
Cindy, let's
here?
talk maybe the key shopping centers here so people know what we're talking about. So the one on the left side is currently where Trader Joe's is, right?
No, the one on
No.
the left side is where Sports Basement is.
Okay,
The one on the right side is where Rayleigh's was.
Sports Basement is essentially,
okay,
sorry, I'm not doing a great job here. This is the box where Sports Basement essentially is.
okay. So
And
this
then
whole area next to the Chevron gas station and all the way to Sports.
Yes.
Basement and
the
stuff.
Valero, right? This is generally speaking where Nob Hill
Okay, was.
was previously, and so those are the two different parts.
And that's where Bank of America up there is, where Bank of America and Buffalo Wild Wings and all
Right,
of that
so
are.
Bank of America is generally here,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
And so you're saying, Mayor, that we remove both of these as housing opportunity and just put it all on the left side?
What I proposed, or what I said in my mind, and that's what Eric asked, is the Rayleigh's or Nob Hill location. I said, move to the west where Sports Basement was. I'm not even, I can live with the Bank of America part. That isn't really my biggest concern. My biggest concern is holding on to this area where Nob Hill or Rayleigh's or gosh, I go back, CVS, all this area right in here maintains this presence that I'll call it the Rick Marks presence, where people go from the neighborhood. We're going to add 5,000, we're going to add more than 5,000 homes within walking distance, certainly within electric biking distance of this within a very few years. Well, maybe a decade later to finish off the entire project. But if you also add where Sports Basement is, that's a prime site. More importantly, and I've been railing on this for a couple of years now, is the Residence Inn is already built, and we are going to get hit with a huge, extremely low income number. We already have an extremely large, very low income number. And this is one of the few sites I could imagine we can do it. And the beauty of it is, you don't have to wait 2 or 3 years for permitting, et cetera. It's built. So the potential's there. But more importantly is I don't want to lose what Rick was describing, I think, and Rick, you're gonna have to stop me if I'm wrong, that neighborhood market that people know they can go to instead of having to leak somewhere else and drive down to Al Costa on the Dublin border or out to Safeway out in, I'm gonna love going over that hill, or over to Diablo Plaza. I mean, this is as important as any retail sales tax producer in my mind.
Mr. Mayor, I entirely agree with you. I believe very firmly that the success of any general plan update is what does it do for the people that live in the city already? And it just seems to me that the more we take out retail areas, the less the plan works for them. I understand online shopping and the impact that it has, but nationwide it's only 14%. We don't need to get so far ahead of what's happening with online shopping that we are self-destructing our retail. And further, I have asked in the past that we take a look at much higher densities in the Bishop Ranch. Whatever number of units we might get where the former Nob Hill was, as an example. Yes, you can move it over where Dave is suggesting, and that's fine. But if that causes problems, what does 45 units in Bishop Ranch look like in City Walk or elsewhere? What do other numbers look like? This shouldn't be an exercise where the housing opportunity sites is so dominant that what we end up constructing is really not the city that a lot of people find as convenient as it could have been. I think staff has a terribly difficult job here. I'm not trying to underestimate it, but I am absolutely convinced that if we want community support or at least understanding about the hurdles we had to jump through, it will be very difficult to say we could have saved some of the retail, but we would have had to backtrack our work. It just makes it very difficult to understand how this general plan update is going to work for the people who live here and the 24,000 that we've already approved housing for. And that has been my concern about this process since December.
Well, I would just add one thing to that. We do also have to recognize the constraints that we have locally in response to state law, SB 330 and the like. We have a situation with active applications in the city that are going to run their course. And so just be aware that we do have some limitations.
I understand that, Lauren, and I appreciate that you have to bring that up, and you are probably right. But where there are options, where we don't have to take the retail out, it just makes no sense to me to do it when there are other options, I think, or at least demonstrate that those other options don't work.
To summarize, I think based on everything I've heard, yes, the discussion question one is that we should designate something like retail shopping for the non-housing opportunity portion of the shopping center. I think that's the summary of our discussion. Is that correct? Would you guys agree?
That's what I'm hearing.
All right. Let's go to 2. And discussion question is for the housing opportunity site that currently have a existing retail non-residential use. What standards would the ad hoc committee recommend staff incorporate into the general plan and zoning in order to maintain a certain amount of non-residential use? Mayor Hudson.
I just want to go back to the first thing Commissioner Marks was, is this the one that you asked, wait until we get this report?
Yes.
I mean, is that the logical way to proceed at this? Are we going to have something before the next meeting that we might have, Cindy, or you're looking for some feedback on just what we have at this time?
In order for us to consider how to preserve retail, we would need to have some strategies and perhaps start with some suggestions of what this committee may want staff to consider as a way to preserve the retail on sites that will now include a residential component on. Some of those tools to limit the reduction of retail or to maintain the amount of retail that currently exists on a site would be some of the strategies that we've identified. So one of those would be, should we be including a development standard that would require a minimum floor area ratio for commercial uses on a housing opportunity site? So, for example, there's a community in Southern California that in their mixed use zone, they require a 0.3 FAR minimum for any mixed use site where you're maintaining at least a 0.3 FAR of commercial uses on a mixed use site. So if that is one good way to maintain retail, we would then evaluate whether or not and what that number should be in a mixed use zone. The other strategy that another community uses is having development standards that are for the mixed use center, but then also specifically for residential, so that it's clear how much FAR should be designated for residential versus for commercial. And that's one strategy to be able to provide subjective design standards so that when somebody is designing their development, that they're providing the minimum FARs and densities that we're requiring of a mixed use site. So we're just asking for some direction. We've talked in the past about setting a percentage of retail or setting a percentage maximum of non-retail. And that can sometimes be difficult when you're doing applying that to a small parcel versus a large parcel. Sometimes that's easier to do for different properties. And so it's something that we'll want to talk about just as a committee. And if there are certain things that you don't want us to consider in this policy, we want to take those off the table now so that we're not doing a lot of sort of hypothetical situations, because we're in a limited amount of time to get the no net loss issue resolved. Because all of your zoning standards have to be in place at the time that you make these changes for housing opportunity sites. And we need to have those in place before January 2023.
Commissioner Wallace.
Sorry, I had a spastic mouth.
Turn off the video instead of the
Yeah,
video.
leave this picture
Although
on.
some people might prefer not to see my face, but that's okay. In answer to question number 2, I go beyond what you phrased it. I think our mixed use zone should specify, regardless of whether the subject property is an HOS or not, it should specify a mathematical or some type of quantitative division between residential and non-residential usage. Exactly which way works best is what I'm asking staff to come up with. For example, they've raised several different methods, one of which is 75% of the space can be for residential, 25% has to be non-residential. They've raised the idea of FAR limits at both ends. So what you've said in here is a variety of different hypothetical ways to approach the same problem. The problem is that if we want to actually have a mixed use development that it truly has both types of uses, we need to have objective standards that the developer has to meet in order to have a project approved. And we need to look at what is the most sensible way to set those objective standards. And that's what I think staff ought to be coming back to us with, so that we can say, okay, this method will result in this type of development or not at all, and this type will result in this. So we have to be able to figure out what makes the most sense, which is why in my earlier discussion, I pointed out the space across from Crow Canyon Commons on Crow Canyon Road that is now owned by a single owner that is now zoned as mixed use and is a housing opportunity site. That is a real world situation where staff can come up with some hypotheticals of different ways to slice the baby in terms of, if you use this method, here's what you'll get. If you use this method, that's what you'll get. That's the way we can make a rational decision on which way probably works the best for our city. So the answer to your question is yes. The further question is, I hope you can come up with something that makes sense for us.
Commissioner Marks.
I agree with Commissioner Wallace. And again, I ask that for the next meeting, you give us some worksheets showing us how that would be done. What is the mathematical formula or the way that you will do this? And let us see both options. And then we can have a much more, a deeper understanding of what it is we're committing to. It seems to me that in the future, this is going to be something that is a potential dispute between a property owner who wants to do something and whoever is on the council and whoever is on the commission. And everybody needs to be able to take a look at the formula or the methodology and apply it fairly and know what the end result is.
Thank you. So I think to summarize all the comments, Cindy, this is where we need more data from staff and more information to make a decision, which is based on a formula, math, data. The mayor has his hand raised up.
Yeah, I would go one step further in that, Cindy, if it's going to be new commercial, just judging from I'm seeing, and I don't think it's going to be new commercial, is I would set a minimum FAR of 1. So if you can, when you're bringing back all the data, what does it look like with a minimum FAR of 1 and the other things that you were trying to get us to go through on the strategy? Because I think that the commissioners have been looking at this a little bit longer than me. I just don't think we're going to get away from new commercial being far of less than 1, especially in mixed use. It's just nature of the beast going forward.
Yeah. And there's data out there, right, that says this population supports this level of commercial as well. And so when we have the full picture, like you said, not making decisions from gut, but based on data. Did I summarize that? All right. So we are on to discussion question number 3, which is for the 6th cycle, Crow Canyon Commons Shopping Center is no longer identified as a housing opportunity site, but the TCMU designation would still allow for residential development with a minimum 20 dwelling units per acre and maximum 0.7 FAR. Should the mixed-use land use designation be removed on portions of the center to maintain a balance of retail and residential uses? This is specific to the Crow Canyon Commons. Anybody want to start off with the comments? Mayor, is your hand raised for this one? All right. Commissioner Wallace.
Okay, I'm going to kick it off since the mayor bowed out. Okay. I'm not that in favor of bifurcating this piece of property between commercial and residential. And it seems to me that the area along Crow Canyon Road should remain commercial/retail because of the visibility. But I'm not sure that the back portion can't be developed for residential. Now, remember, we carved up Country Club for between residential and retail. I don't know why you couldn't do the same thing for Crow Canyon Commons. If you imagine a line running east and west on Crow Canyon, about halfway between Crow Canyon Road and the back of the area, you could have commercial retail on the front end so people could see it and come in. That would actually also protect the residential on the back from traffic. I am at this point, I'm not really inclined to give up the idea of having housing in that area, even if it's not an HOS. After all, having housing on that site would actually help retail because people could walk from housing to whatever retail was there. I would guess that you will always have some type of grocery store like you have Sprouts now, used to have Lucky's, simply because it's right off the main access to the east side of San Ramon, which, as our economic consultants have told us for the last 5 years, ought to be the gravity center for retail and commercial in San Ramon. So I don't know that, particularly the way it's drawn, to have the retail, the residential surrounded by non-residential is the way to go. I could be convinced of that maybe if we had people come in and say, given the size and location of this particular property, the most logical way to redevelop it is X, Y, and Z. But this seems to me to be sort of a ham-handed approach to a very large property on a very visible thoroughfare on the main side of San Ramon. And I would want more input before I made a decision, which sort of dovetails into several of us asking for the consultant's report to make a decision like this, because frankly, this is one of the larger decisions we're being asked to make today.
I think, Lauren, you want to put in a comment there, and then the mayor can speak.
I just wanted to comment on the fact that this is really sort of an inverse discussion of the marketplace. Because what we're really talking about in the area that is not shaded here would be it remaining as a mixed use potential. So it's not to say that it would necessarily be housing, but it could be housing, or it could be a combination of residential and retail or commercial uses, consistent with whatever policies we put in place to create a correct balance and ratio there. But what it does do is it does protect the core retail area of this shopping center. So anyway, I just hope that helps clarify a little bit.
Couldn't you do the same thing by having a numerical split between the acreage that's available for residential versus non-residential, 25-75, say?
The difference is where that occurs.
That's right.
And by doing a horizontal delineation like this, you are controlling not just the percentages, but also where.
That's true, but looking at the picture you have here, having a donut in the middle of the drawing, it sort of reminds me of Piedmont and Oakland.
Well, keep in mind to the west and south is a housing opportunity site.
Yeah, I recognize that. We had the discussions about whether those areas right off the freeway off-ramp are really great housing opportunity sites, but they are that in our general plan. So yes, I understand that.
Mayor, you have a comment there?
Yeah, I would also add it's one of our education sites as you go south. I at first was kind of lukewarm to this because it's so close to the freeway as well. But as I look at it, you could put a lot of housing in there that would support the retail and have a school within walking distance if that site remains.
Is that Doris Eaton is what you're
Yes, yeah. I mean, I didn't like that when they put that next to the freeway either, but it's hopefully by then everything will be electric, so we won't have to worry about diesel and all the other little things that go along with it. But it is certainly something to be considered presented this way. If you were going to put housing in the in the Crow Canyon Commons area, this might be the most sensible. At first I was against it, but I mean, I could see the potential for this. I particularly would like the idea that if we did something like this, that the road that comes across that Camino Ramon went all the way through to Norris Canyon. And I know I brought it up to Bishop Ranch many years ago, and they thought that was an idea that was very possible. So Crow Canyon's been there, gosh, over 30 years now, I think. So they've got to be thinking about things to do. This is a possibility, is all I'm saying. Not, hey, go change it right now, but this one makes some sense. And the key to it that you're asking, I believe, is that they maintain a balance of retail and residential uses. So I'd say yes to that. And I don't know, would love to hear what others have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we can maintain this as retail would be great, because we don't have a large portion of retail. And if there's some larger retail that needs to come in, this is, again, going back to our taxes and some of, we've talked about our budget and tax, we need that sales tax revenue as well. And some part of the city, we're going to need a larger footprint for retail as well, not just smaller footprint, right? So for me, I mean, it's important that we have a larger portion, consecutive larger portion of retail as well, which we could perhaps bring in some of the revenue generating businesses that might need that. For example, car dealerships. Commissioner Marks.
Just a quick question for either Cindy or Lauren. Where it says maintain a balance, what do we mean by a balance? Is there, I'm not sure how to interpret that. And I think lots of people could interpret it different ways. What did the staff have in mind?
Well, I won't speak for Cindy, but I think what comes to my mind is question number 2. So in terms of the mixed use component of this is looking at how you define the remaining mixed use area within the shopping center, and just going straight out and saying that the more viable portions of this center will remain retail or commercial in nature, I should say, retail and services. But that still comes back to some of the other questions we've already pondered that we haven't got into the details yet of what those.
So in other words, when we solve the puzzle of number 2, we may have solved the puzzle of number 3.
I think there are components of that, yes. Okay. I don't know, Cindy, do you have a different take?
Yeah, I really, this speaks to the heart of the question of what is we've been hearing a lot these last 2 years, the feedback of the community, having a viable retail shopping that's in walking distance. But we've also heard from our retail community that they need there are certain parameters that they have in order to be able to operate a successful retail center as well. And, in discussion with some of our stakeholders, those tend to be where there's less visibility off of the main roadway, where some of the leases may be shorter term, and access, to centers, depending on where those are. All of those play into some of these decisions about what the right balance of retail and residential are. As I mentioned in the staff report, almost all of the shopping centers have had the ability to have mixed use and redevelop over the last 20, some odd years. It wasn't until just recently that we received an application to introduce residential for the first time in an existing shopping center. And so even though the opportunity has been there, there are other factors that play into what a shopping center's decisions, needs to be when they also define what the right balance of residential and retail is. So, as a city, we can provide development standards that will sort of guide that development. That's really going to really, again, the heart of the question in discussion too is what does the city see as the right balance, but also the community and property owners all have a different definition, and we kind of have to get to a middle ground as to what is that's going to be the right fit for this community.
Mayor, and you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I still look at this as the opportunity. Whenever you put housing around retail and close to the schools, you're reducing that vehicle miles traveled. It looks so good to certain people watching the development we do. But maybe what caught my attention more is the amount of housing, and I don't know exactly what it is. I just know that East Bay Regional Park District collected a pretty good sum to develop the Burrell property, which will be very close proximity, closer to this retail than anywhere else, other than the one they have to go by on the way to get here. This could change the fortune of a lot of businesses in there if it's developed soon enough. I mean, if this is 5 or 6 years and permitting and getting to the point of where they've actually put something in the ground, and it's another exercise, and Planning Commission can do it again for the 7th cycle. But this could actually invigorate this site a little bit. I don't think they're going to do housing per se in the non-residential area, even though I think that's what I just heard in the mixed use. But certainly some housing around there. The commercial end of that's dead, folks. I mean, we had offices in there. I mean, at one point when we were at 2222 Camino Ramon, and we're never going to use it. The college was in there. I know there was, I'm not sure what the building is that's closest to the retail center, but commercial that's not something that I think they're going to be expanding on. So no, I think the opportunity here is something to take a real hard look at after you had your look at this report we're waiting for on number 2. So yeah, I'm a little more intrigued than I was when I first looked at it.
So perhaps for this one as well, we want to look at the report before we make a decision on this one. Is that the direction? Yeah. All right, Cindy, does that answer your question? That we look at the consultant's report and some data before we want to say a hard yes or no on this one?
Yeah, that's, we'll keep working through options for achieving that ideal mix of residential, non-residential, and retail and non-retail. So there's very specific, distinct, and they're very distinctly different terms. We have currently percentages for a mix of retail, non-retail, but we've never traditionally, at least over the last 20 years, have had anything that specified residential, non-residential. And it sounds as if there is some direction for us to look at what that might mean for a mixed-use site, a balance of residential and non-residential, because we currently just leave it up to FAR and densities, and that seems to be a little too vague right now. I think in general is what I'm hearing.
Mayor, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I did. Cindy, I mean, I'm really impressed with all this knowledge that we've hit you with tonight. But the reality here is, have we messed you up in making this housing element for I mean, we've got to have this by the end of the year. We still on target? Did we do anything that just, shall we say, threw that off a kilter, or should we be concerned that something we're doing today might change that, or we can still proceed?
So point one, in terms of housing opportunity sites, I didn't necessarily hear that we are changing the housing opportunity sites per se that we've in essence already included in our draft. And so we would still move forward with that recommendation at our June 21st meeting and just confirm that. Because if we change housing opportunity sites now, we have to look at a number of other solutions for removing them and we have to put them somewhere else. We have to increase density somewhere else, and look at different ranges. So I don't think that I heard that today.
Okay.
As Lauren mentioned, we also have active applications that are identified as housing opportunity sites. And because of SB 330, even if we were to make those changes now, because they're active applications and at the time they filed their application, they already are vested under the preliminary applications. There's not really a whole lot we can do with vested applications through a preliminary application. But what we have the ability to do is look at what the right development standards are to maintain the retail. When you do get a chance to look at that retail analysis, you'll find that San Ramon will always have retail leakage. I think we've seen that with all of the other retail analyses, that because of the retail that exists in other surrounding cities, there will always be retail leakage, probably except for home repair. The city does really well with home repair. Short of those types of businesses, we will always have, to a certain degree, some leakage. How much more retail we can support, I think, is important to know what that number is, so that when you make these decisions of how much retail to percentage to maintain on these parcels, we at least set us off in the right direction on how that will be facilitated through these percentages. So I think that we have the information that at least what we need to report back next time.
Home improvement and gasoline, which we remind is certain, never mind.
All right. With that, are we good to adjourn? 6 p.m., 6:01 p.m. See my OCD.
Do we have a date that we're adjourning to, or is this just
Or
adjourned?
do you need, yeah. Or do you need a date for the next meeting before we adjourn, actually, Cindy? I should have asked that.
So I would expect that we'll be returning probably at the end of June. We haven't really talked about what generally dates or times that work well for this committee. So we could at least check our calendars and see who's here towards the end of June, and if there are times that work better for the 4 committee members, we can at least look at those to target those dates.
Sounds
Commissioner
good to
Marks,
me, thanks.
Wallace, any preference for dates, and are you available end of June? No, or do you want us to look at this now, or you'll send it out and we're good?
We can send it out if 4 o'clock works better. Afternoons work better than mornings. We can plan for that, and we have some staffing that we'll need to look at for the end of the month, but we'll make something work and send out some dates if end of June is our target.
Yeah, end of June, and please, 4 o'clock works better for me. So we can go with that. All right. So I think with that, we are adjourned at 6:02 p.m. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Goodbye.